From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Happy Wednesday and good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast. It's great to be with all of y'all this morning again from beautiful Miami, Florida, where the weather is just impeccable for the month of January. Thank you all for tuning in to a packed show today. You know, it's Wednesday after Patch Tuesday, which essentially means that we're all going through what I like to call the 30-day wheels in motion kind of alert, identify, validate, schedule, plan, and patch. And with that being said, it's also increased activity by threat actors who look for advantages within this entire process. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk a lot about Patch Tuesday today, including a whole lot of other news from China, from North Korea. Russia and Poland seem to be headed towards a clash here, and that's not a good thing. And tensions are mounting between China and Taiwan as well. We'll get into all of those today, and especially how cybersecurity is playing a critical role. So without further ado, join me this morning for a coffee cup cheers. Coffee cup cheers, y'all. Traveling has its perks. When you have an espresso machine in your room, way, way better. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our lead story of the day. The Department of Justice announcing that the FBI has deleted a Chinese plugx malware from over 4,200 computers and networks across the U.S. The malware was controlled by Mustang Panda or Twill Typhoon, and it infected thousands of systems that used the plugx variant with a wormable component that allowed it to spread through USB flash drives. So kind of go back to the day. According to court documents, the list of victims targeted using this malware included European shipping companies in 2024, several European governments from 2021 to 2023, and worldwide Chinese dissident groups and governments throughout the Indo-Pacific, including Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, Mongolia, India, Myanmar, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Once it infected the victim computer, the malware remained on the machine, maintaining persistence, created a registry key, which automatically ran the plugx application when the computer is started. Owners of the computers infected by the plugx malware are typically unaware that they were even infected. The FBI obtained a warrant in order to go through and delete those on January 3rd, by January 3rd, and they were given that the command that was sent to the infected computers by the FBI told the plugx malware to delete the files it created, delete the registry keys, create a temporary script file to delete the plugx application after it stop the plugx application, and run temporary files. And again, they kind of did this with a court order, and then they notified victims based on who the victim was. So that's the news there. This is obviously being attributed to China, and plugx is something that they've used in attacks since at least 2008. And it's something to keep in mind, right? As practitioners, when we see this kind of things, it's stuff that we need to add into our modus operandi as the types of threats that we can potentially understand. And then are we in anywhere in that range of companies or organizations that the Chinese, the Russians, or someone would like to attack in order either to use us as leverage to get someone else or as a geopolitical move there as well. Let's get into some Patch Tuesday with Microsoft patching 159 different flaws, including 8 0-days. 8 0-days, 3 that are actively exploited. The Patch Tuesday also fixed 12 critical vulnerabilities. These bugs are obviously listed, but 58 of them are remote code execution, 40 are elevation of privileges, and 24 are information disclosure. 20 created a denial of service. There's 3 actively exploited Microsoft 0-days at the moment. This is the first. It's a series of these 3 that are being exploited. They're in the Windows Hyper-V anti-kernel integration VSP elevation of privilege vulnerabilities. Those are CVE 2025 21333, 21334, and 21335. No information has been released as how these flaws were exploited in attacks, but they all show that they were disclosed anonymously. So information is still scarce on these 3 0-days. The additional publicly disclosed 0-days is a Windows app package installer, elevation of privilege vulnerability, that's CVE 2025-21275. The other one is CVE 2025-21308. There's a Windows theme spoofing vulnerability. and then 3 additional ones, which is a Windows Access Microsoft Access remote code execution vulnerabilities, CVEs 2025 21186, 21366, and 213905. So all of that. Adobe also released updates and a whole bunch of others. Let's get into that. Fortinet confirming a zero-day vulnerability. So that's CVE 2024 555901. It's been described by Forti as a critical vulnerability that affects the Forti OS and Forti proxy. It could be exploited by a remote attacker to gain super admin privileges, and that have to use a specially crafted requested a Node.js WebSocket module. According to Fortinet, this affects Forti OS 7.0.0 through 7.0.16 and Forti Proxy 7.2.0 through 7.2.12 and Forti Proxy 7.0.0 through 7.0.19. Patches are included in Forti OS 7.0.17, Forti Proxy 7.2.13, and Forti Proxy 7.0.20. So you want to make sure you're on the right OS here and you get that done. The news of a potential zero-day broke out last week when Arctic Wolf warned it's observing a campaign targeting Fortinet FortiGate firewalls and that their management interface exposed on the internet. So Fortinet advisory does not mention Arctic Wolf, but their IOCs shared by both companies indicate that this is the CVE, the same zero-day that Arctic Wolf brought up. So you want to make sure you get these patched up as well. They also released 13 advisories as part of Patch Tuesday for high severity vulnerabilities that affect the Forti Manager, Analyzer, Client, Forti OS, Forti Recorder, Proxy, SASE, Voice, Web, and Switch. So you want to make sure you get those addressed. Nvidia, Zoom, and Zixel also announced patches for multiple high severity vulnerabilities in their products. Nvidia released patches for 3 security defects in their container toolkit and GPU operator for Linux, including 2 high severity improper isolation bugs. The first issue is CVE 2024-0135 and 0136. Both vulnerabilities were resolved in Container Toolkit version 1.17.1 and GPU operator 24.9.1. Zoom rolled out patches for a high severity type confusion issue in the workplace app for Linux that would allow an authenticated network attacker to escalate privileges. That's CVE 2025-0147, and it impacts the meeting SDK for Linux and video SDK for Linux. Again, low probability, high severity, but low impact. And Zixel announced a fix for their improper privilege management flaw in the web interface of 23 different access points and router models. That's CVE 2024-123.9 or 8. The improper privilege management vulnerability in the web interface of certain AP and security router firmware versions could allow an authenticated user with limited privileges to escalate their privileges. Again, authenticated users and that already have to have limited privilege in order to do that. So again, low complexity attacks, but worthy of note. Our friends over at Ivanti also announced patches for multiple critical and high severity vulnerabilities in both their Avalanche application control engine and endpoint manager. And I don't have a lot of friends at Ivanti at this point. I think I got more hate mail over my thing on Ivanti over the last 3-4 days than I have previously. So that's interesting. So this is going to be very, very interesting. All right. So CVE 2024-10811, CVE 2024-13161, 13160, and 13159er impact EMP versions 2024 and 2022 SU6 that have a November 2024 security update installed. So the EMP January 2025 security update also resolves 12 high severity defects that could lead to remote code execution, denial of service, and escalation. Avalanche version 6.4.7 was released on Tuesday. That fixes 3 high severity path traversals vulnerabilities. And obviously, there's more CVEs here. 2024-13181, 13180, 13179er. The first 2, Avanti says, address an incomplete patch. And then CVEs 2024-47010 and 47011 were released back in October. Jeez Louise. I mean, how bad was Avanti in building their security product to get there? All right, so we've got some comments here. Let's see what our YouTube audience interpreter says. Good luck with the patches. Patches is a gift that keeps on giving. Surprised the system still works. No successful attacks on any major infrastructure. No, and typically, these 0 days are a point of entry, the interpreter. And then what ends up happening is if you're not patching it on time and they're able to get in and they scan your network and they can move laterally, they can get access to something where they feel like they can get a payday, they'll use it. Otherwise, they'll just leave you alone. So there's a lot of that there. Everything is becoming more complicated, by the way. And yes, systems are getting bloated, sluggish. There's a lot that's being built in terms of cloud optimization, and that also adds to the task of patching, which becomes even more difficult. On the ICS and SCADA side, both Schneider Electric, Siemens, Phoenix Contact, and CISO released security advisories as part of the January Patch Tuesday. Schneider Electric released 9 advisories this month. 6 of them describe high severity vulnerabilities that affect the Power Logic HD PM6000 high density metering system. That's a privilege escalation. Remote Connect and SCADA Pack TMX70 utilities, also remote code execution, and Modicom M340 and BMX-NO communication modules, information disclosure and denial of service, and then Web Designer for Modicon communication modules. Again, another information disclosure and remote code execution there. Siemens only published 5 new advisories this month. Each of them covers one vulnerability found in the Mendix, Cypriotech, surveillance and industrial edge management, and their Somatic S7-1200. Siemens started releasing patches for some products, and only workaround and mitigations are available for the other. No fixed plan for the industrial edge management is planned at this time. Phoenix Contact has released 2 new advisories. One of them describes a medium severity cryptographic issue in the CM dongle license flash drives that could be exploited through physical access. Again, you have to understand that in SCADA and ICS, a lot of these vulnerabilities are only able to be exploited through physical attacks. Everything. And so you might see something and you go, why are they not releasing a patch? Chances are it's either air gapped, meaning the item is only used within a controlled network, within a best cyber system, which is a bulk electrical system, cyber system that's isolated. You can only get through if you're in the control room of the power plant. And to get to the control room of the power plant, you typically have to go through at least 2 or 3 different keyed entry doors, which means, the difficulty and likelihood of an attack really does go up. And you don't, you plan based on that, right? So you hope that your defenses catch it, because if someone makes it all through the defenses, then you've got systematic failure, right? And just as a general rule of thumb, having now almost spent 2 years in the power industry, that's not a thing unless the culture is really, really bad, right? So that's just something to keep in mind why you see it this way. We'll move away from Patch Tuesday because there's a whole lot more, including Adobe and then so many others. And we'll go to Ashford finally agreeing to settle their SEC charges that they made misleading disclosures about a cyber attack. So the Wall Street Journal kind of made this about Gary Gensler, who's really, as an SEC chair, might go down in history as one of the worst. The SEC data breach disclosure rule that the SEC passed, hopefully with the new administration and a new chair, might get kind of a little bit adjusted to not put so much burden of reporting on companies within 4 days of going through an incident, allowing them maybe to give either less information or give them more time to report it, and then give it and maybe set a kind of like a traffic light system based on the material breach impact. So if it impacted operations of key systems and you couldn't service customers, let's say for 3 days, then that's a red. And if it's just kind of just a basic data breach that didn't impact operation, it could be a green. Like, set up something that makes more sense in terms of reporting. Either way, Ashford went through a data breach that impacted 46,000 people back in 2023. They ended up getting fined $115,000. Yep, there you go. That's really going to urge compliance. Let me tell you, $115,000. Gary Gensler may go down as one of the worst. And I've met the guy. I mean, he's just, he's everything. His picture makes you feel like he is. All right. North Korean hackers have allegedly stolen over $660 million in cryptocurrency in 2024, according to the US, Japan, and South Korea. They're warning the blockchain technology industry of the threat posed by North Korean hacking groups as they use crypto as a means to finance the survival of the regime there as well. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, it's funny how they say democratic when it's a dictatorship. The 3 countries say that we're responsible for at least 5 massive cryptocurrency heists, stealing $308 million from DMM. We talked about that here on the show. $50 million from Upbeat, also $16 million from Rain Management. That one we did not cover. $235 million from Wazir X in India. We covered that extensively, and $50 million from Radiant Capital. The APT groups affiliated, including the Lazarus Group, are which was designed by relevant authorities, continued to, as essentially a threat actor group, continue to demonstrate pattern of malicious behavior. No, they're under sanctions, and they're trying to get paid. And the crypto industry is low-hanging fruit. It's also money that they can launder quickly through China and Russia, and get their hands on hard-earned cash, which is what the regime there wants in order to fund the activities they've got. Chinese cyber operations that use phishing emails and zero-day exploits against Taiwanese organizations, including government agencies, telecom firms, and transportation, were significantly higher volumes of attacks in 2024. On average, Taiwan saw more than 2.4 million attack attempts per day. And again, so this is a big number. And why I picked the story is not because China's going after Taiwan. If you watch the show, if you go back, I've talked about this a lot. China is the main threat to global stability in terms of corporate espionage and industrial espionage and general economics. Now, Iran has a different threat, and we won't get into Russia. I've got a whole slew of feelings on all of those. But if you've watched the show at all, you know my feelings around China. Well, 2.4 million attack attempts per day is a number. It's a number that I want to kind of get to, because these are numbers that a lot of organizations throw around. I've seen CISOs go to like boardrooms and say, we deal with about 800,000 attacks per day. Well, attack attempts. And attack attempts could be something malicious and non-malicious identical. Someone could be just doing a scan. It logs it as an attack attempt. A lot of times you're unable to differentiate between the two unless you're whitelisting a process or someone's using a third-party tool in order to look at your environment. Now, this is doubled from 2023, according to them, that they had about 1.2 attack attempts, 1.2 million attack attempts in 2023. It's now 2.4. Obviously, China's kind of increasing the amount of work they're doing on Taiwan. And China has become increasingly aggressive against government-backed groups in the country, compromising telecom systems in the U.S. With Salt Typhoon, stealing information from Southeast Asia and Africa. And the stuff that they're doing in Africa is absolutely horrendous. I'd love to see all those pro-Hamas groups actually go and maybe protest the fact that China is giving predatory loans to dictators in Africa that then give and building useless things for Africa, useless infrastructure that the folks in Africa don't even need. What they need is water, food security, and education in order to be able to build and sustain their own economies. And then they need good trade relations. But China is corrupting those countries with predatory loans. And then when those countries can't pay it back, they essentially take parts of lands, ports, airports, etc., all over Africa. That's also a significant threat there. So successful attacks have risen for China on Taiwan, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around that. So something to keep in mind. And our final story of the day here as we wrap up, the Polish presidential election is coming very, very near. And Poland and Russia, oh boy, folks, they have a history. The Poles don't like the Russians. Obviously, the Russians occupied Poland up until the fall of the USSR. Most of Poland was under Russian control. And so there's a lot of distrust between the Poles and the Russians. And just, what is it, about 10 years ago that a Polish prime minister who was traveling on business to Russia, his plane crashed on approach, killing him, his staff, some generals in the Polish army, and a whole bunch. They blamed it to bad weather at the time. And I'm not saying it wasn't. There was bad weather. However, kind of suspicious because he was very anti-Russian, going on a Russia visit, and his plane happens to crash upon approach to a Russian airport. So just saying, there's history there. The group's strategy, they're seeing a lot of social media influence in order to sow discord and division in Polish society, which seems to be fairly unified. Poland, out of all the EU countries, is properly between them and Hungary. They're very, very kind of stricken in their approach on their protecting the culture. They're not very much part of the EU, Poland being the most attacked country in the EU when it comes to cyberspace incident. According to parliamentary meetings, Russia is no longer hiding the fact that Poland is its main target. They're looking to maybe try to destabilize Poland a little bit there. So Poland security services announced that they've dismantled several cyber espionage groups linked to Russia and Belarus, trying to paralyze the country with cyber attacks, and again, sow discord and all of that. It's the stuff that we hear about here. They didn't disclose a lot of information on these attacks, which leads me to believe one of two things. They're locking down on what the Russians are doing, and they don't want the Russians to know what they're cracking down on, but they want to increase awareness within the public around the fact that not everything you see online could be could be true. And by the way, with the TikTok ban, if there was more transparency, because Charity Wright from Recorded Future said this, and she commented on our website. If you go look at the article, she wrote a very smart comment. If NSA and other organizations thought that they could if they were more transparent about the effects of TikTok, if they came out to the public people and gave a full write-up of those things, then talk about it, right? Talk about that, because that would have maybe assisted people to understand the TikTok ban, but they're not being very transparent. They're not being transparent with the American people. And again, this is kind of the bureaucracy of the government, and hopefully in America, we'll see that change with the new administration that will get sworn in on Monday, the Trump administration that's promising more transparency. And I hope they actually mean more transparency to the American people, because I think as people, we're entitled to know what's happening so that the decisions that our government makes and asks us to obey and go by are actually in line. That's it for our show this morning. We'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, live with all the latest and greatest. Thank you for all the comments here. By the way, the YouTube chat is blown up. Really appreciate all of y'all for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, follow us, go to cyberhubpodcast.com for all the latest and greatest. By the way, entire show notes are available there, including all of the stories to the links, and all of that will now only be exclusively available either on our YouTube channel or on our website at cyberhubpodcast.com. Have a great rest of your day, y'all, and most importantly, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.